Rochelle Ludwinski, and I am so glad that you are joining us for the European Windows Mini Quilt. In this first video, I want to talk with you about some of the things that will pertain to all of the blocks that you make, and a few housekeeping issues. So let's start with the parts of your pattern. Your pattern will include a color photo, a full color photo of each of the blocks, because as a stitcher, sometimes I can't see enough on the cover photo to know what's going on. So I like a full color photo of each one. And because that's what I like best, that's what I include in the pattern. It will also include a placement guide. A placement guide is on vellum like this so that you can lay it down, pin it down, lift it up, and put your pieces in place so that you can make sure that you get them in place. This is typically what you would get in a pattern would be these items, but you wouldn't be able to see where the piece behind it goes. And so you can create your pattern pieces from that. However, in this particular pattern, you will have pages that have the pattern pieces separately. Now, for this one, if the item is a square or rectangle, I did not make a pattern for it because you can draw squares, you can cut squares that are the right size, squares and rectangles. And so those parts aren't necessary, but the other shapes I have on paper here. You can either copy these onto freezer paper, or you can trace them onto freezer paper. Or if you do adhesive, like a heat and bond light, you can go ahead and flip them the opposite direction. And each of these instructions will also give you information about the windows and the window backgrounds and what you need. Okay. So we'll address each of the blocks as they come, but some of the general instructions I want to talk about in this video. So in your pattern, it will list the supplies that you need. I separated each of the wool products that you needed by block. So even though this brown is the same as this brown, is the same as maybe one of the other browns, I don't know, and your terracottas might be the same, even though it's the same color block to block, I've gone ahead and just put what you needed for this block. I'm not sure whether the set that you get will be, you'll get all of your pink in one, or if you'll get them spread out through the whole thing. And so if you are cutting the stuff for block one and it seems like you've got plenty of wool, beware of where you put it, because there might be another block that uses that same color, and you're going to want to use your, I called them the same thing, so you're going to want to use your wool list to make sure. Okay, and in the thread list, if they start with, I didn't make up these abbreviations, they're used by these manufacturers, but if it says, let's see, if it's manufactured by Sue Sparco, it will start with an EZ or an EZM. EZ is for Eleganza, EZM is Eleganza in variegated colors. I don't know why an M, but that's what that means, if that helps find the colors. If it is Wonderfill manufactures all of the Sue Sparco Eleganzas, but they also manufacture some of their own. So if it starts with a W, EZ, it's a solid Eleganza color in a little ball manufactured by Wonderfill. If it's WEZM, it's a variegated little ball. The number 5s and number 8s that are with them show what size they are. A 5 is fatter than an 8, and most of them are 5s and 8s. There's a few that are other things. If it wasn't particular what color you get, like if for some of these chenilles, we had them custom made and I wasn't sure what color she's going to call them. So I called them coral, lime, and rose. Let's see, usually Silken Pearls are SP5 or SP, and House of Embroideries start with HOE. And Edmar Glory, Edmar has shiny rayon threads. They're sometimes a little bit frustrating to work with because they are rayon, but they were perfect and tiny, and so I went with that one. There is a thread collection for this set, a set that was specially manufactured by Wonderfill in sizes that they don't normally have, that you couldn't get from other companies, so that you have what you need for this. And so that collection has 9 balls of thread in it in colors that Wonderfill already made. They just didn't make them in a size 5. Okay, each of the backgrounds is 7.5 by 9.5, except of course the big background on the bottom down here, and it is 14.5 by 9.5. I trimmed all of my backgrounds to that accurate size before I started. Wool is a little bit forgiving, so if as you are doing the embroidery on it, it kind of shrinks a little bit. Number one, you're pulling it too tight if that's what's happening, but number two, you can stretch it a little bit as you're putting it back together in a quilt. So I do trim them to the exact size before I start. Okay, the size of the window hole for each one. So here's what happened. In a quilt that I made in the past, I just stacked windows and holes and backgrounds. But like this spot right here would have the off-white background. It would also have this gray window on it, and then it would have the frame around it. And because of that, we would get 3 to 4 layers thick of wool on this whole thing, which is difficult for quilters to quilt and tends, because of the nature of wool, to pop way out. And so on this one, I removed the back anywhere that there was, most of the places that there was a window hole. Not everywhere, but most of the places where there was a window hole, I went ahead and removed the backing. So I cut a hole in the background and then put the window backing on top of it. And so we're going to go through the process of how I do that for a random one, but that is what they look like on the back. And that gives me, there's a little bit of thickness right here, but overall this space is not thick, but it still creates the image of being behind. When I first was looking at it, if I put this red wool on top, it didn't look like you were looking through a window. It looked like I'd stacked a bunch of wool. And so that is why it's done this way. See, especially if it's one of the ones that has shutters, you can see right here that I've got my background, I've got my shutters, I've got my window frame. So this section right here, if I didn't cut it out, would turn out to be, it could be as many as 4 or 5 layers thick right here. And that's what I was going for, was trying to keep it as flat as possible. So you have that option. You can stack them if that's what you would prefer to do. All right, let's try an example and let me show you. When I was first, as you're wondering, where did those blocks come from? When I was first doing this quilt, I designed it as 24 different windows. And then we decided that it would work better as a mini quilt. So it just has 9 windows. So this is going to be the things that I use here, and they are from block, what was block 24. So this is, let's see, the background on this one. This is the background on this one, and you can see that if it's been trimmed to the right size of 7.5 by 9.5, when you lay your freezer paper on it, this design does not include your 1/4 inch seam. This quilt has 1/4 inch seams. So when you're putting your placement on, can you see how I just slide it down a 1/4, up a 1/4, in a 1/4 on all of them? I need to iron this piece because it's not quite looking like that, but you can see how this shape does not include those seams. That helps with making sure that you get things lined up on the edges. When you are doing the placement on these, you want these to end up on the bottom, not in that 1/4 inch seam. Now there are some exceptions to that. Places like this, I didn't want the edge of the green to show there, because obviously it's bigger than that. So that one will have a 1/4 inch added to the edge of it that will be sewn into the seam. But anywhere that I wanted something to end up close to or on the ground, it will be a 1/4 inch up. All of these little guys will be a 1/4 inch up. Okay, so on this one, the instructions for this one, which I have right here, the instructions for this one tell you to cut your shutters. They tell you what size to cut them because they're rectangles, so we'll cut the shutters. They tell you where the window hole is and what size it is. And so let's go ahead and mark that the way that I marked it when I was doing these blocks. All right, it says, let's keep that handy. It says that the window hole is in 2 1/8. So let's go down, and that has when it gives you that direction, that includes the 1/4 inch. So since the blue may not show. Let's see. The white will show well enough on this. That's what we're going to use. So in 2 1/8. So in 2 1/8 is right here. And what I did, so from the edge, I came in 2 1/8, and then I just drew a line that I thought would be long enough. Now, it would be better if I had my bigger ruler than this, but it won't show in the video. So 2 1/8 then is going to be, I'm going to draw that line right there. Let's make sure that you can see that. Can you see that line? Yes, you can see the line. Okay, so 2 1/8 in. There we go. And then down, it says we are 1 7/8 inch down. So let's go 1 7/8, so almost 2 inches down. Again, a longer ruler would line it up, but also it would be difficult to see. I have a ruler that's in between, but most of my rulers would extend way off. Okay, so that is where it starts. And then it says the size of it is 3 1/4 inch wide. So from that part, I would go 3 1/4 inches. Okay, we want to go 3 1/4 in. So let's try it from this corner. 3 1/4 from my marks here. What, I think I'm gonna make them, I can't, I have things supporting my videoing here, so let's see. There we go. From our corner here, we're gonna go 3 1/4 in. So I'll line up that tip at 3 1/4 in and 5 inches tall. So let's move that dot to 3 1/4 in, 5 inches tall. Where'd the dot go? There it is. 5 inches tall. So my little dot is right here, if you can't see that through. 3 1/4 in, 5 inches tall. And those lines that I have, I'm lining up here to make sure it's square. Then I go ahead and draw my lines here. So from that, I will be able to see where to cut the window hole on this one. Can you see my marks on that one of where to cut the window hole? And I will use I don't know if I typically cut in a different place than I video. So I believe my blade is up there. So that's how I would know exactly where to cut that window hole. So I will go ahead and cut that window hole and then come back. The same thing when you do this one, you can see that it's got a lot of straight lines. I use my ruler and my rotary cutter to cut those straight lines so that I can keep them straight. And that's how I'll cut my shutters. And then the window backing is what goes in this spot. And I gotta find a big enough piece in gray. There we go. So I will cut the window backing, and then I'll come back and talk with you about what to do about the ones that have curtains that go in them. So I'll go cut those things and then come back and finish the video. Okay, I will get a shorter ruler today that fits within the confines of my little recording space with all of its supports around it. Couple of things. Number one, I wasn't very careful. When I did this originally, I did not go very close to the corners, and then I hand trimmed the corners later, except for one case where I accidentally went too far. And I thought after I finished this one, I should show them that. I had one where I went too far like this. Couple of different options. You could iron a tiny piece of Heat and Bond light to the back of this, and that would support it. Heat and Bond light, and then a layer of, I would just use a cotton or something that's supportive. You could put a little piece of interfacing behind this to support it. I did it to this block right here, and it was right up here, I think, that I cut too far, and I just whip stitched those little pieces together, and it's not noticeable at all. So if you accidentally cut too far, like I did on this one, that's what I would do. But that, I just cut that according to the lines. And then remember that our instructions had the sizes of the shutters. So I cut the shutters those sizes. It had where the window hole was, and it had your window backing. Your window backing is going to be 1/4 inch bigger than the hole that you have. So there's your window backing. And then I brought this down so that I could show you how I did this. Again, I cut this with the with my rotary cutters because there's so many straight lines, but I don't go too close to the corners, so they have to be hand trimmed later. And I was not as careful on this one as I was on my original because I didn't want to, like, I've gone a little over the edges, and I was just trying to hurry for this video. So, okay, clip, 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 and then I'll show you on the outside edges of this what I did. All right, so then to cut like these outside spots on top, let's see if I can reach around and still keep this in the video screen. Here we go. So just line those up with the lines that you have. It's much quicker to cut them, and you will get nice and square lines if you cut it with a rotary cutter. There's that one. Now, I mentioned in the instructions for this that it's a little bit complicated now that you've got a hole in your background to get that piece square. The reason being that because there's a hole in it, there's not the support there that will keep it from stretching too much. And so I want to show you how I typically put it together and iron it together. Okay. I also mentioned that the window frames like this are fairly fragile as well, so you have to make sure you get them lined up correctly. The other place you have to be careful about how fragile they are is when you're pulling your freezer paper off, that you don't stretch them. So just be gentle as you're pulling it, so that you don't stretch them out of place. But you can see how they could easily be put on crooked. So you want to make sure. I typically would not put these together with a on a surface on a countertop, but I did with this one because they needed to be so careful. So there's going to be 1/4 of an inch of black extra, or of the background color, on all of the edges like this, and you can see how I'm carefully laying it down so it's going to be square, and I've got it on my cutting board so I can assure that the windows are square and that everything's square. So that is how I am careful about that. Same thing with this one. First, I would stitch this down. I go ahead and stitch this down with a periwinkle color on this one. Always match this one because your stitches are not going to show on the black. And then as I put this piece on, same thing. It will overlap by about 1/4 of an inch. And you can pull out your freezer paper. Oh, I forgot to clip the little corners down here. You can pull out your freezer paper alignment guide and make sure it looks like I don't have it quite high enough. So it needs to scooch up some, but keep it careful because you can see how these sides could slide out and you'll get a distorted window. So make sure that you've got things lined up and pin it carefully on a surface where you can check for the straightness, because if you're doing it in your lap, it's not going to turn out straight. Now, the other thing that I said that I would talk about, this one in particular does not have lace windows. But for those of them who do have lace windows, the lace doesn't have to show, lace or fabric. Okay, so for those that need lace, I'm all about doing things fast. And so if this one called for lace, I think I just put it on backwards. Let's see, nope, there we go. For those of them that call for lace, I go ahead and add the lace to the background like this. And remember, it's 1/4 of an inch bigger than it's gonna be, than the hole. And we're gonna cover it with not only the background, and then it'll have the window frame on top of it. So I go ahead and use my sewing machine and stitch right along that edge to hold it down. And this one I would stitch it in 3 sides. And then for any of them that end in the middle, let's see, I can't remember. Yes, so for like this one, you can't see it, but it's been machine stitched down on those 3 sides, and then I just hand tacked it down on this edge right here. Same thing for windows where you have gathers. This one is a flat one. These are gathered, and we'll talk about those when we get to those blocks. But that is how, when I'm preparing it, I am using my machine stitch to stitch this down. So I would machine stitch this in place, and then I would line it up correctly. Again, I'm not worried because I know that that's going to be covered. So let's make sure we get this guy in the right spot, and utilize your cutting table to make sure that you've got it square. Pin it carefully along this line, and then when you can do your whip stitches and then come back and put this guy in place. Use your placement guide to get it in the right spot. Make sure it's square. Make sure your windows don't bulge out like this. They will naturally on your quilt have a little bit of bulge to them just because because of the wool as they quilt them. So you want to keep them square on your quilt. And then after that's on, you'll go ahead and add your shutters. And usually those also overlap just a little bit. But again, you want to keep them square. So make sure that when you're pinning them, that you're pinning them on a flat surface that you can see that they are square. And so typically, well, for starters, I would not use pins this big, but typically to get those edges right, I would pin this direction. So I know it's going to stay square along there. Okay, so that is how we put these backgrounds together so that they end up like this. So everything ends up square. It ends up not very thick, but it's got everything we need to put those together. Okay, the rest of the questions that we will get with each of the blocks, I will go ahead and answer in each of the separate block videos, but that should give you a head start as far as getting things laid out if you want to get a block or two ahead on putting your backgrounds together. Okay, we will see you in week number 1 with this first block.